Shalom, everyone, and welcome back. I hope everyone had a nice Pesach together with family and friends. And it was a very special Pesach because many of us had not seen our family and friends for over a year. So to come back together again with them was really a delight, really a wonderful thing. And it really made a very special Pesach, I know certainly in my home, and I'm sure in your home as well. Let's talk a little bit about the counting of the Omer. We know that the Torah tells us, you should count from the day after Shabbos, 7 weeks. And this refers to the counting of the Omer. What does it mean, counting the 7 weeks, or Mimachras HaShabbos, from the day after Shabbos? So in ancient days, there were a group of Jews called the Karaites, the Karaim. And they took the Torah very literally. Actually, throughout Jewish history, there have been people like that, Jewish people who have taken the Torah literally, not according to the tradition of the rabbis. And these Karaim said that what it means is that from on Pesach, after Shabbos, you start counting the Omer. So the rabbis said, no, that's not what it means. The tradition we have is from the second day of Pesach on, that's when we start counting. And that has become the universal tradition among Jewish people, that we all observe the counting of the Omer from the second day of Pesach and on. We count the day every night. We count. Today is the first day of the Omer. Today is the second day of the Omer, etc., until we count 49 complete days. And the 50th day is Shavuos, the holiday of the giving of the Torah at Sinai. So we count 49 days altogether, and there are many halachas dealing with it, which some of you might be familiar with. We count every night with a bracha, Al Spiras HaOmer, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Asher Kedeshanu Mitzrayim B'Tzivanu, Al Spiras HaOmer, on the counting of the Omer. If you forgot to count at night, you can still count during the daytime, and then continue that following night with a bracha. If you forgot one complete 24-hour cycle, then you can no longer count with a bracha, but you still have to continue counting. So the way the Shulchan Aruch tells us to do it, in that case, is that you are yetze with the chazan. The chazan says the bracha, you answer amen to his bracha, keeping in mind to fulfill the mitzvah of the bracha through him, because you're not allowed to say a bracha anymore in that case. And it's quite common, a situation like that. People travel. Certainly if you cross the international date line, it's a big mess, because you could lose an entire day or gain an entire day by crossing the date line. So you'll miss out, or you just forgot about it. Or you don't daven regularly in a minyan, and that sometimes can cause you to forget also, to forget about counting the Omer. No one is there to remind you. That's how important it is to daven in a minyan every night and every morning. But so it's common. But generally speaking, we're supposed to count the days every single day. What is the idea of counting the Omer? So we know that in temple times, in ancient times, the Jewish people were commanded to bring from Pesach until Shavuos, a daily offering of an omer's worth of barley. And we were supposed to count these days until Shavuos, which is the receiving of the Torah in Sinai. Every day they would bring an omer, a barley offering, to the temple. Today we don't have any more sacrifices, so we can no longer bring the barley offering. So instead, we simply count the days. And through counting the days, we fulfill the mitzvah of, it's as if we're bringing the Omer offering. With the counting of the Omer, there are other traditions as well. We know that many, many years ago, about the year 200 of the Common Era, the great Rabbi Akiva lived. Rabbi Akiva was one of the greatest of all the rabbis who ever lived. He had something like 24,000 students. We know many stories of Rabbi Akiva, of how he started learning Torah at the age of 40 years old, and he was ostracized by his family, but his wife, Rachel, stayed with him and stuck with him. He went to yeshiva. He ended up going to yeshiva, and the story goes that he was in a brook, and he was watching a brook. He was actually a shepherd, and he was watching the water flow over the stones of the brook, of the river, and he looked at it and he said, "It's interesting that water, which is so soft, can have an impression on a rock which is so hard, and perhaps the Torah, which is so soft, can have an impression on my hard head, which is like a rock." So he decided to go away at the age of 40 years old, to go away and study in yeshiva. He studied for many, many years. He studied with his wife's consent, and after 12 years, he returned home with 12,000 students. He came and he overheard a conversation between his wife and her father, who was a wealthy landowner, and his father-in-law said to her, what can you learn in 12 years? 12 years is nothing. You can't learn anything in 12 years. So he overheard this, and without even saying a word to his wife, he turned around with his 12,000 students and went back to study. He came back at the end of another 12 years with another 12,000 students, and his yeshiva became the greatest yeshiva of its time, and in fact, one of the greatest yeshivas of all time. It was the Harvard of yeshivas, and the students who studied there were among the greatest rabbis who ever lived. However, they had a problem. The problem they had was that they were very, not jealous of each other's learning, but they had no respect for each other's learning. They each believed that their way of studying, their way of understanding a halacha was the correct way. And everyone else's way was wrong. And therefore, because of this, they showed no love of their fellow Jew in this regard. So a plague came down from heaven and killed most of them. And it became, you can imagine, the greatest tragedy, one of the greatest tragedies of Jewish history, that so many great, great rabbis perished. The question that the Rebbe asks is, and the Rebbe and others ask, is, how is this possible? Rabbi Akiva, his most famous saying of all of his saying, Rabbi Akiva was a Tana, he was a rabbi of the Mishnah, one of the greatest rabbis. He's quoted very often in the Mishnah, and very often his halachas, his halachic opinions, are followed. So one of the greatest sayings of Rabbi Akiva was, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. You shall love your fellow as yourself. The question that Rabbi asks is, how is it possible for Rabbi Akiva's students to not have love of their fellow Jew if their Rebbe was Rabbi Akiva? And if they heard V'ahavta l'recha kamocha morning, noon, and night, this was his greatest saying. Why is it that these greatest students of his did not follow his teaching, his most basic teaching, not a crazy far-out teaching, but the most basic teaching that he taught was that? How is it possible that they didn't get it? And these were the greatest rabbis, most brilliant minds who ever lived. So the Rebbe answers by saying that indeed they did love their fellow Jew. They loved their fellow Jew with a tremendous, tremendous, all-encompassing love. But the problem was they believed that their way was the correct way, and other people's way was not the correct way. And because they loved their fellow Jews so much, they said to him or her, they said, you must follow me. This is the way, the right way. Your way is the wrong way before God. God is not accepting your way. God is accepting my way because I love you so much. I want to help you so much. Therefore, you should follow my way. And this was the problem. The problem was that it's not that they didn't love each other, they didn't respect each other. And we find this throughout the world, especially among Christians. Christians certainly say that they want to convert Jews. Why do they want to convert Jews? Because they hate us? Is this a form of anti-Semitism? Not at all. It's actually a form of love. They love us, so they want us to convert to their religion. And that's why when I meet Christians or missionaries, I'm not offended by them, because that is what they do. That's what they do. That's their nature. They want to convert us because they love us. And you'll find, unfortunately, throughout Jewish life as well, Jewish life and others, that this concept of my way or the highway is all too pervasive. And it's a very big problem. Everyone thinks that their way is the only way. In the world today, virtually every religion believes that their way is the only way. The only religion that does not believe that is Judaism. Judaism believes that you can be a very fine person without being a Jew. You don't need to be a Jew in order to go to heaven, in order to achieve God's goodness and God's love. You don't need to be a Jew at all. In fact, we strongly discourage it. We are the only religion that actually discourages conversions. If someone was to walk into a church, if a Jew were to walk into a church and say, I'm thinking about converting to your religion, they will grab them with open arms. They will love them. They'll be so happy. Oh, we got a Jew to convert to Christianity. If a Christian walks into a synagogue and says, I'm interested in converting to Judaism, well, they will strongly discourage it. And the rabbi will say, oh, go away. It's not for you. You're not really interested. And in fact, even at the very end, when we do accept them as a Jew, as they are immersing in the mikveh, we tell them about all the hardships of being a Jew and how difficult it is to keep the mitzvahs, how hard it is to keep Shabbos and kosher, and you can't eat this and you can't do that, and you have to do this and you have to do that. And we repeat it several times in the conversion process. So why is that? Because we believe that you do not need to be a Jew in order to achieve God's love and God's good graces. Anybody can, providing they observe 7 basic laws of humanity called the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. The 7 laws of humanity. What are they? Don't kill another person, don't steal from another person, belief in one God, not to curse God, to establish systems of justice in the world. What else? Courts of justice, kindness to animals, these types of things. If a non-Jew observes these 7 laws, they are doing great. You don't need to be a Jew. You don't need to convert to Judaism in order to do that. We respect everyone as long as people act in an ethical, good, godly way. And that's how we believe. So Rabbi Akiva's students indeed did love their fellow Jew, but they didn't respect their fellow Jew. And that was their problem. And perhaps the lesson for all of us is extremely that. To love means to respect another person as well. We have customs that we have during these days, of course, in commemoration of the death of all of Rabbi Akiva's students. We observe certain mourning rites during this time period. And those are, we don't make weddings during this time. We are allowed to get engaged, though, but no weddings. We don't cut our hair, no haircuts. We don't go to parties or have or listen to music, festive music during this time as well. The question is, when does that start? So some say it starts right after Pesach. Others say it starts from Rosh Chodesh Iyar, including Rosh Chodesh. Usually we do not mourn on Rosh Chodesh. It's a semi-yontiv, but in this case we do. Everyone holds that these rules apply on Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and it continues for 33 days because the death of the students occurred for 33 days. Now, exactly when are those 33 days? So, because there's a question about it, some start after Pesach, and they continue only until Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer. Lag BaOmer is a semi-holiday because it is the day of the birth and the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, books of Kabbalah, and also who was one of the great Tanaim of the Mishnah as well, and a great student of Rabbi Akiva. He was one of the few that survived this plague. So because of him and his celebrating him and Rabbi Akiva, we suspend the laws of mourning on that day, the 33rd day of the Omer, the 18th day of the month of Iyar, which is Chai. And during Lag BaOmer, of course, there are many customs. We go out to the field, we have outings to remind ourselves of when Rabbi Shimon fled from the Romans who were oppressing him for studying Torah. And he fled in the fields, and he defended himself and his son with bows and arrows. Many people make bows and arrows during this time. They practice archery. Little kids are seen with bows and arrows, hopefully not to hurt each other. On Lag BaOmer, we have bonfires and different opinions about why we like bonfires. One is because they are yortzeit lamps. They are the lamp that we light on a yortzeit on the anniversary of the passing of someone. So they're like a huge yortzeit lamp. Another reason is because they represent the light of Torah learning, the intensity of Torah learning. Torah is considered like a far ner Hashem mitzvah Adam. The candle of God is the soul of man. Also, in Rabbi Shimon's time, he fled from the Roman persecutors. He and his son Eliezer fled from the Roman persecutors, and they hid in a cave for many years. So the Romans, they pursued him, and in those days, they didn't have any cell phones, so people would light torches. They would light huge fires on hilltops to warn the Jews of the coming of the Roman troops so that they should run away, so they shouldn't be caught by the Romans. So there are different opinions about why we make bonfires. Of course, the greatest bonfire and the greatest celebration of all is in the city of Meron, just outside of Tzfat in the Galil, in the north of Israel. And in Meron, on Lag BaOmer, they have hundreds of thousands of people converging on the hills of Meron. They light bonfires. They make hair cutting ceremonies for the young children, and they have tremendous celebrations. Some of them slaughter sheep, and they make big barbecues, and they join together in tribute of Rabbi Shimon and his son, who are buried in Meron. I have been to Meron many times, and it's a very small place. It's a tiny little village. You can see it from Tzfat. Very tiny little village. The main aspect of the village is the grave site of Rabbi Shimon. I can't imagine how hundreds of thousands of people converge there every year, and they join together. Of course, HAVAT comes there in force, and they put tefillin on with people during the daytime, and they talk with a lot of people, because many of the people who come are not at all observant. So it's a tremendous celebration, and if you have the opportunity of going to Meron sometime, you should go there as well. So many people continue with the mourning rites until Lag BaOmer, and then that's it. After Lag BaOmer, they have weddings, they have hair cutting and music and everything else. Many do not. Many continue through until Shavuos. In Chabad, that's our custom. We continue until Shavuos, with the exception of Lag BaOmer. We take a break during that period, and we continue until Shavuos. So that is the Chabad custom, and people should follow the customs in which they were raised, in which they are familiar. This is a very interesting time, and it's a time actually just before the summer, where Shavuos really begins with the summer period. After Pesach, we are getting ready for the summer period, and we're making plans for the summer. So it's interesting that this happens just before the summer when people are making their plans. And certainly during this time, it's advisable that people should think seriously about what they're doing this summer, where they're going. Today now, with the virus lifting, people are starting to make plans, travel plans and things like that. And this is an opportunity for you to spend your summers in very meaningful ways, not just by hanging out at the pool, but in meaningful ways, traveling to ancient Jewish communities and studying our history and our traditions, or perhaps spending some time in a yeshiva learning. Many very fine yeshivas, both in America and Israel, welcome people to come just for the summer, or even just for a few weeks during the summer, to study. Both people there are teenage programs, there are young adult programs, and there are programs for older people as well. And your local rabbi would be happy to recommend any of these programs to you that would satisfy your needs and what you're interested in. So that's a good idea. If you're traveling, it might be a good idea to travel to places where Jewish communities once existed and perhaps don't anymore. A few years ago, my wife and I went to Spain. We spent 2 weeks in Spain. And we went to the ancient Jewish ghettos of Barcelona and Sevilla and other communities there as well. And it was an amazing experience seeing where Jews lived during the Inquisition and how they lived during the Inquisition in places that really they don't live anymore. And it was a very fascinating and in many respects a depressing trip, but it was a trip that we needed to take. Some Jews today are traveling to Eastern Europe. They're going to see some of the ancient communities that were there as well. Places like the Ukraine, where many of the great Hasidic communities were. And they're going to visit the grave sites of some of the tzaddikim, like the Baal Shem Tov or the Maggid of Mezrich, or the Alter Rebbe, places like that. So these are opportunities as well. So I'd like to encourage you all to take advantage of these places and take advantage of this vacation time we have in very meaningful ways, and to spend the summer days in Torah study and spending time with our family. Shalom. We'll see you next week.